Welcome to Synchronicity. We have a special episode this week. If you haven't been hanging around the Patreon, then you might not know about this one, but I started a feature there called Mystic of the Month, or it's starting today, where I'm going over a mystic. That is a vaguely loose term that basically just means anyone who has been a mystic throughout all of recorded time. And that gives me a little bit of leeway in who I choose, but there's some acknowledged ones. The first one we're doing is Milarepa, the great Tibetan yogi, considered a Buddha by many in the Tibetan Vajrayana tradition. And these episodes are going to be about, they're at least an hour long, where we go over the life of these mystics and some of the cool things that happened to them and their perspectives and whatnot. So we're doing that every month. I'm trying to get the episodes out probably mid-month every time. That gives me enough time to finish one, research the other, get the other one out. And that's going on the Patreon. I believe it's on the $7 tier. I may bump it down to the bonus episode tier. I haven't decided, but don't be surprised if I do that. A reminder, you can join the Patreon without spending any money. There is a free version of the Patreon where I release clips and exclusives, so it's not just a pay-to-play situation. So if that's your reservation, you don't have to have it anymore. I am going to Turkey in this Sunday. So I will be in Turkey for 3 weeks. Then I'm coming back. We'll be in the United States for about a month. Then I'm going back to Turkey. Then I'm going to Germany and Italy. Then back to Turkey. Then I'll be home at the end of August. I don't know what the schedule for the podcast is going to be like. I know that I will be getting episodes out. I'm bringing my Zoom recorder. They will be coming out. I've let go of the idea that this has to be a weekly thing, or it has to be some set schedule. So if episodes are coming out sparingly, it is what it is. I'm not going to abandon you like I did in 2022 for like a year and a half and, get out episodes once every few months. That's not what I'm going to do, but it may be a reduced amount. The Patreon will still be going on, both the free and the paid versions. So if you want to tune in and you like that stuff, that's the place to go. That's pretty much it. There's a lot of positive things going on in 2024 for me personally, and I think just for the collective as a whole, but there's also still a good amount of turbulence. And I think it's important to acknowledge that. So if you're going through those periods and you're kind of having that like, oh shit, what the fuck, the wobble, as we can call it. And the wobble's super important. The wobble is what happens. It precedes every big, timeline, lifeline, whatever switch you want to call it, dimension jumping. It precedes that, in my experience, 100% of the time. So don't fear the wobble. That'll be the next episode. Maybe I'll record one called Don't Fear the Wobble before I go so we can get that out while I'm there. But yeah, this episode is a preview of the Mystic of the Month. It's about half of it. I'm going to fade it out in the middle. If you want to go catch the other half, that's going to be on the Patreon, but that's what we are doing this week. So you can get a taste of what it's going to be like and see if you like it. Maybe you're like, I don't give a shit about Milarepa. I feel like you should. He's pretty fucking badass. But maybe you're like, I just don't care. That's cool. But we're going to be doing this every month, so I wanted to let you know. You guys are the best fans ever. I appreciate all the emails and just kind words from everyone who gets in touch on Instagram and Twitter and email and the Patreon and all of that stuff. Like, you guys really are the best. I think I have some of the best. I've said so much wild shit at this point that for the fans who are here, or the people who tune in to this show or me and whatever I'm saying into a microphone, you're kind of the coolest people, at least in my world, because you've at least hopefully understood that a lot of the stuff I say is usually meant with love. And if not, I try my best to correct that down the line. Anyway, rambling intro accomplished. Without further ado, here is the Mystic of the Month preview for the month of May, Milarepa. Welcome to Mystic of the Month for May 2024. This is the first time we're doing this. This is a relatively contrived title. It's just an excuse for basically me to research and or share someone who I think embodies the qualities of a mystic. What that means essentially is someone who seems to be tapped into some aspect of consciousness that is not necessarily perceived by the five senses that we know and love, right? But an actual way to tap into some truths or things that seem resonant or make sense, or there's something to investigate there. Like, what are they saying there? Or that makes a lot of sense and I'm not sure why. Or, oh, I know why that makes sense. That's super wise. So it hits a lot of different parts of us. It can be an intellectual curiosity. It can be a skeptical curiosity. It can be a weird affinity towards or an attraction to, or something that just kind of like pulls on our heartstrings, or just something that we don't really know why we're drawn to it, but we are. And this can be someone who is like Milarepa, who really, with the words we know and about the actions and the deeds of his life, those are essentially the, things we know about him. Like, we don't hear the Milarepa songs, right? We know the words of them, we know the lyrical content, but we don't necessarily have the ability to hear what the song sounded like, nor would we necessarily even like the actual sound of those songs. Although I imagine if they were kind of like divine wisdom melodies and we understood the words, like, you would probably like them. But we don't. That's the point. Like, it doesn't have to be someone who is doing the present thing they're claiming to do. A lot of this stuff is second, third hand, fourth hand, fifth hand information. Milarepa, definitely the case of Milarepa, includes that. So for some context of who we're talking about when dealing specifically with Milarepa, this was a dude who was born in 1052, right? What we know is the year 1052, and died, around 70, 80 years later, right? And the main principal text that people will use to piece together his life is from a biography, depending on who you ask, an autobiography, but a biography of someone named Songyang Haruka. Also, get ready for me to butcher some Tibetan names. I'm not going to get like deep into the weeds. I do recommend, if you want like an intro into Milarepa, is The Life and Story of Milarepa by Songyang Haruka. That is translated into like, a few different versions. I listened to the audiobook. There's also, a physical text translated by multiple people, which is really just kind of what we're going to be going over today, but obviously looking at it through a lens of how practically can this help us in the 21st century. We'll be here for a little bit. That's safe to say. I'm covering my bases when I say 21st century. But it's just a really interesting life. The character of Milarepa has always resonated with me personally. I think there's an aspect, what I really like about Milarepa is he had a very complicated life. I think that's the initial draw for a lot of people. That's sure. Yeah. He did some stuff. He murdered some people. He was in this tragic soap opera type of situation with revenge and black magic. But after he studied with Marpa, right, his teacher, he basically then became almost like a missile shot to places that were notoriously like bad vibes. Like that was his move. He was like, I'm going to bad vibes place and I'm going to emanate good vibes, and that's going to beat the bad vibes. And it's a simplistic rendition or like characterization of what that is, but that is kind of what it is. But he did it in a bunch of specific ways. He did it through songs of wisdom, of Dharma songs, you would call them, of, basically saying the way of the world, and it being so true that these like demonic beings essentially are like, oh, you're right, Milarepa. Sorry that we tried to harsh your buzz and everyone's buzz in this area. We're demons. This is what we do. Sorry about that. And this kind of wisdom of reality and unreality made a substantial change in that region or in those people's lives or in adherents or people. Now, it's also important to like, I don't know if it's important, but I'm going to do it, to talk about the historical, where Tibetan Buddhism fits into all religious beliefs. It wouldn't be called a religion so much, a contemplative science, a way of the mind. There are varying degrees of new and old. I don't think just because something is newer or older makes it better or worse. That's important. People can get really hung up on that and trying to find the newest or the oldest, the most sacred and ancient thing. That's not what figuring out whether a spiritual chord resonates with you. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's not necessarily the barometer. It can have some influence. Like, you'd be like, wow, this tradition is quite old and it has lasted the test of time. But when you dig into a lot of this stuff, the idea of time is immediately questioned in most of these things, right? Because in Buddhism's case, it's basically saying that, like, listen, this shit is so a dream, so illusory. We know these things about this dream. It's transient. You know, if you cling to things, you're going to suffer. If you try to avoid things, you're going to suffer. And it's not saying this is like it's some Nietzschean hell. I mean, this is up for debate depending on how you want to interpret Buddhism. But what I mean by Nietzschean hell is like an infinite hell loop that you just can't escape from. The Buddhists would describe that as the wheel of suffering, the wheel of illusion, right? Maya and samsara in this case, right? That's the Hindu and Buddhist, ideas of what this world is. And that can sound terrifying if you're like, holy shit, or it can be liberating. And that's kind of the way Buddhism looks at it. And it is done, especially Tibetan Buddhism, through very specific, like, essentially visualizations mixed with meditations so focusing on aspects of mind and aspects of reality. And there's a lot of lists and there's a lot of qualities that are outlined. So if you are a logical minded person, I wonder how many Virgos like Buddhism. That would be interesting to know. But basically there's a lot of like breakdown of how the mind works. And in Tibetan Buddhism, there's like a huge emphasis on like specific lineages because they do believe in reincarnation and it's in time, and that reincarnation is like prescribed or like witnessed, and then a child can be, anyway, it's a thing. It's a vibe. I don't know how much I specifically believe in reincarnation, but there's plenty of evidence, if that's the type of person you are, that this stuff isn't like, there are an astonishing number of coincidences at times that would seem to prove some aspect of this being true. Also, the secret kind of schools, the more like you have to study through a lineage and a guru type of channels. That's very important in Tibetan Buddhism. Guru, as you will see with the story of Milarepa, is an important aspect of this tradition. For a lot of modern spiritual seekers, this will come back around, by the way, like 100%, like within our lifetimes, probably go and come coupled several times at least. Guru is out. Guru is like, hey, don't tell me what to do, bruh. I know this, like, I'll find my way with my own spiritual vibes. Like, don't tell me what to do, which is like, I get it. That's totally my vibe, like, most of the time. Like, I don't want to be told what to do by some spiritual authority. But there's also the part of being spiritual where you're like, maybe it's not all me. Maybe it's not just like what I think of as me that is doing this. So maybe I have some like, gratitude and humility and grace, and I can learn from other beings who may, still be me, but another aspect of me and consciousness. And it's a cool experiment. Anyway, there's some balance there. And there's some like, you use that at times where it feels appropriate, but the guru aspect will come back around. People, and it is going on. I mean, there at any point in time, there is guru worship going on. It might not just be through a spiritual guru worship. It could be celebrity culture worship. But that type of pedestalizing and top-down hierarchical spiritual like pass down is out of vogue, I would say, right now, right? With the majority of people, not all people, but a lot, the zeitgeist, right? The ever throbbing unconscious, subconscious, collective, just like undulating the way people feel and think about things, which you can be aligned with or not aligned with. I'm not gonna, this will be for a different thing, but like I started revisiting reality transurfing from the beginning, and the audiobook is crazy because there's all these like sounds and background effects and it makes it sound so ominous sometimes. I'm like, I don't want it to sound this ominous. This could just be a normal thing without the creepy music. But it's, it's interesting. And the one on pendulums, I think, is the first aspect of reality transurfing. If you go in order, I went with Tutti first. But if you are doing pendulums, it's like, oh shit, is this thing? It's like, am I on a pendulum? What the fuck? It can get very kind of like weird. Buddhism and a lot of Eastern religions, and just you'll see through the Mystic of the Month series, assuming I keep this up for more than 3 or 4 months, which I think I will, you will see that this has there are hallmarks of mystics that transcend particular schools of thought around spiritual concepts and spirituality or life or reality. There's a clear thread going through all of them is the way I would describe it. It's how a lot of these mystics would describe it too. It just becomes clear as day. You're like, oh, this person from this place, even though it's a totally different thing, is kind of talking about the same thing. Like they're talking about, and then that kind of can be like, oh, they're talking about the exact same thing. The other parable that's important to keep in mind here comes from another one of my favorite saints who we'll definitely cover, Sri Ramakrishna, right? An Indian mystic, is this elephant story, which a lot of people hear as in Indian or Hindu tradition, is that, there's a bunch of guys, they're arguing about this thing, they can't figure out what it is, and it's like there's an elephant there, and we know it's an elephant, but this guy's like, oh, I can feel the trunk, it's like a hose, and another guy's like, nah, I feel this thing, it's like a tree, because he's feeling the legs of the elephant, and he's like, no, there's this huge thing, it's like a bunch, is like a pile of dirt, and they're like, no, and it's an elephant. They're just doing and interacting with different aspects of the elephant, right? It's not the same. It's not like they're wrong. It's just they don't have the capacity to grasp the full thing in totality and all the perspectives, or haven't just come across all of those different aspects of an elephant, and they are just thinking this is the thing that it is. So cutting through that in terms of mysticism, I think, is something that for me personally has always been kind of cool to witness. And it speaks to our own personal interests too. You can be completely, captured by the mind and vibes of a person or people, and have it make complete sense to you. That's great. That's a tool we have at our disposal. You should not throw that away when you encounter those things. And again, doesn't even have to be just spiritual concepts. Mysticism can be a musician. It can be a poet. It can be, you know what I mean? It doesn't have to necessarily always even express lyrical content. Hazrat Inayat Khan, a great mystic, wrote The Mysticism of Sound and Music. Sound and music is a form of mysticism too. So any creative outlet you can find that can be expressed is a form of mysticism. Becoming a natural mystic, right? Bob Marley. So there's a lot of aspects of mysticism that cut through everything. That's what's cool. All right, let's get to Milarepa. So my goal here, by the way, is to not pause and have this be an uninterrupted stream of thought, consciousness, recapsulization. That's probably the most accurate term for this, but encapsulation of Milarepa's story, life, and aspects of it that are worth kind of looking at. It's impossible, by the way, I think, to totally cover his entire life. You have to pick and choose the parts, A, that I can remember, and B, that, will fit into, I'm hoping this will be about an hour or so, fit into a kind of distillation of who Milarepa is. But I do encourage you, the Sangyang Heruka life and story of Milarepa is worth it. It's not even that long. It's 9 hours, and it covers a ton of stuff, and it is a great primer. There's also the 100,000 Songs and Verses of Milarepa, which is a more kind of it's a bunch of it's his life and aspects of his life where he goes to different places, because you'll hear in this kind of retelling that he goes and does a bunch of shit, and in the biography of him, it's like he went and did a bunch of shit. And maybe there's like one or two things that happens at some of those places, but obviously, there's a bunch of stuff he was doing in between. And so the 100,000 verses is something you can really like go and see the specific examples of him like dispelling demons from a certain place and meeting with the town and talking to his boys. And like there's a whole vibe of that. Also, I'll point out, and you realize it pretty quickly, there's not this schism between like relationships, like having wives and partners. There's no schism in terms of how society was working in Tibet. Again, this is 1500 this would have been written, 1400 this would have been written, the biography of him. But if people were living as man and woman, so these were lay people in many ways when these stories begin. Now, Milarepa is a specific example, but even when he goes and studies with Marpa after a crazy series of events, Marpa's got a wife, and the wife is a key figure in Milarepa's evolution. So it's important also, again, here, I keep saying it's important, like it is, but they're looking at the feminine divine through like a spiritual lens. I think you want to kind of see where that fits into each area. And I've found that some of the most accepting and loving mystics who really seem to like honor both of those aspects of the divine. So you will hear aspects of Dakinis, which are feminine goddesses here. You'll certainly see Marpa's wife helping tremendously in Milarepa's kind of like ascension to one who understands the Dharma and the way in a way that, bestowed him all these seemingly magical qualities, which isn't the goal. And he's very clear to point that out, especially towards the end of his life and his ultimate death from the physical plane, but are just like byproducts of kind of seeing through aspects of reality. Again, that can be interpreted a lot of different ways, but I do think, living a content and happy and simple, in Milarepa's case, life is great, but just a life that with awareness of the way things are gives you a certain appreciation for just things that in your life, which can have a positive effect regardless of the experience and circumstance you find yourself in, which in Milarepa's case was often like the throes of utter despair. And there's not other ways to say it. And there's a lot of like depictions of him and his family like openly weeping and being like, this sucks. Like our lives are very bad. This is not good. I should give up, and gives up a few times. Super important. All right, so let's get to Milarepa. Like I said, born, I think it was a 1052. I'll actually look this up because I want to get the alleged age. Yeah, 1052. Born in Tibet, died 1135 in Tibet. So the lineage of like gurus or wisdom, like Buddhas, and just like a lot of that in Tibet, not a lot of it, traces back to Indian mystics who traveled to Tibet. But up until Milarepa, there was not, because Marpa had gone there, if I'm not mistaken. Marpa, if I'm not mistaken, was born in Tibet. But I'm going to look this up because Milarepa, as far as I know, was the first. Yeah, he transmitted a lot of the Vajrayana teachings from India. But Milarepa was essentially the only one who stayed in Tibet and learned mysticism, like in the Dharma tradition of, Vajrayana Tibetan Buddhism, solely in Tibet. So he holds a special place in that lineage of teachers. His teacher, Marpa, who we will get to, learned this from, Naropa and Nagarjuna. Like it goes back. These are relatively traceable histories as well. We're not like, I'm saying the year like 1052 he was born, right? I know it's crazy, but like 1100 years ago, not even yet, is long. It's not that long. 1,000 years ago, less than 1,000 years ago. I know that sounds like like, holy shit, 1,000 years. It's like not that many generations. When the biography was written was like 600 years ago, right? So we're not talking about immense amounts of time, which I think is what makes Tibetan Buddhism like really interesting for a lot of people, or people are drawn to it, because it's like, this is a pretty resonant in time thing. And, you can actually go back, like we can look back in history books and be like, oh, this happened. Now, Mandela effect withstanding, which you can look into the past alteration of time. That's a whole other aspect of it. But just let's say in historical time, not that long ago, we're not even talking about 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years ago, which again, isn't even that much time. Anyway, Milarepa is born. He's born into a pretty good family. His dad owns land. They own like yaks. They just got it like kind of popping. He has a sister and his mom, and they're just like, their lives are not that bad. But one day the dad gets sick and he's like, I'm going to die. Like, I'm pretty sure this is it. And I want to make it known that, you guys get my stuff and my land. Like it's for you guys, my family. I'm going to leave everyone something, but this is like, I want you guys to be taken care of. But it happened very quickly and it wasn't necessarily done in the most proper of ways. So the dad dies and they're like, oh man, that's sad. That was a very quick thing that happened. And then very quickly, Milarepa's aunt and uncle, right, go in, the brother's sister, and I believe her brother, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong on that. Don't quote me on that. But they take over at the situation, and they're kind of dicks, is the best way to put it. They essentially start going and taking all of the stuff from the Milarepa's family, and they're like, oh shit, like this is bad. Like this, they seem like they're kind of like being dicks about this, but they take it to the maximum extreme and essentially just like make the Milarepa, his sister, and the mom slaves. And they're like, yeah, this is the best thing. Like this is who they want. Like this is what your husband, he didn't plan it right, but now we're just gonna like basically slave you out, like hardcore, like giving them like very little to eat, making them work the maximum amount. It's not the best situation, and it lasts a pretty long time, up until the time that Milarepa, he's like 15 or so. So he's basically been like slaved most of his like life, right? He really like did not have a good go of things. And at this point, he's not known as Milarepa. He is just kind of this dude who lives in this unfortunate situation. No one can really help them, right? There's no real way. She tries to get help, the mom, through like various maneuvers of like going to other relatives and just being like, hey, like, have some compassion, like, what he wanted. And it's just like, it doesn't work. And so it's kind of this hopeless situation. So at 15, the mom says to Milarepa, she's like, hey, you got to go study black magic because we don't have a way out of this. And if you don't study black magic, this shit is just going to be like unbearable. And like how, and she's like, basically, he's like, nah, I'm not, he wasn't sure about it, but he's like, I'll go and do that. We'll get to the extreme she goes afterwards. So he goes off, and it's not easy to study black magic, but the first thing he says to his first teacher, he's like, I will offer you my mind and body. Like, you have that. That's all. I don't have a lot, but I can offer you that. We gathered together what we could to make an offering, which was traditional to go and study with someone. He's like, but I offer you my mind and body. Fast forward, dude is impressed by that, sees that he's really like down for the cause, and is like teaching him black magic, mainly how to cast like hailstorms and like other various like possessive and like illusory, like making ghosts or scorpions and shit, like regular black magic shit, like I'm gonna cast a spell on you, boom. So he learns this. He comes back at one point, and his mom is like, what the fuck? Like, you're learning black magic, but nothing has happened. If anything, it's gotten worse. Like, I'm a slave. Your sister's a slave. What are you doing? We gathered what we have so you could learn black magic. And he's like, yeah, like I'm learning it, but there's still like more stuff I should learn. And she's like, listen, if you don't do something about this situation, basically, if you don't like fuck with the aunt and the uncle, I'm going to kill myself. And Miller was like, holy shit, don't do that. Like, okay, I'm going to cast these hailstorms. I'm going to fuck with the land. And during this wedding procession for the uncle's son, their son, that couple's son, he does some like illusory thing when like the horses like look like scorpions and they run into the bottom of this house. And basically it kills like 35, 40 people. It's a lot of people, right? It kills a lot of people and it's a huge tragedy. And the mom wasn't like chill about it. She was like, oh shit, look what happened. Wonder what happened there. Would be a shame if someone, had cast black magic on your thing and you're just reaping what you sow because you people are dicks. And people are like, geez, like even if she's right, that's like, it's kind of fucked up. Like you gotta like rein it in a little bit. It is a tragedy. So Milarepa is starting to feel kind of bad about all of this stuff. And I'm skipping over a fair amount, but he's basically like, I don't think that this is a good thing that I have done. I've killed people. I've learned how to do all of this like black magic stuff. And, he was even at times asked to do black magic on like people's fields. Like some townsperson came to his initial teacher and was like, hey, this person's doing this. Can you please cast a hailstorm on them? And he's like, yeah, like now I'll do it. And just like, it's weird. It was a little weird, basically. And he's like, I don't think that this is great. Like, it doesn't seem like anyone is really better off. They're still in the same, the aunt and uncle also didn't die. They were basically, the part of the spell was to keep them alive. So they had to witness like all the fall of their house and the destruction that has come with it. Just like these terrible things. So they're fucked too. It's just like more misery on top of misery. The mom was like, gloating for a little bit, but it didn't substantially really change her situation. She's still kind of like in this beggar's mentality and things aren't working out. The sister at this point is like, we find out later, is like kind of gone off and like doing what she can do to like, survive. And Milarepa essentially starts realizing like, maybe I need to go and find some other way. Like this feels like something that I've done isn't right. And I need to like go and find something else. Milarepa, pretty cool dude. I hope you enjoyed that preview of this month's Mystic of the Month, Milarepa. We will be doing another one. I'll announce who the next Mystic is in a week, 10 days, something like that, because I will pick one and start researching. I have ideas of who it will be. And initially, Mystics I'm choosing, I'm like abundantly familiar with, just because I like Mystics. It's a cool thing to discover. But then, if people have suggestions or I haven't heard of people, that would be amazing to hear from them. So if you're into this type of stuff and you like hearing about these types of people, we're going to be doing this for the foreseeable future. And that's over on the Patreon for the full versions of that. But you could also just like, live off the scraps of the previews too. If it's something, it's cool. I will say this. So if you want to wait me out on this one, this is also a possibility. I may turn this into a separate podcast, right? If I build up like a season's worth of these, 12, 13 episodes of Mystic of the Month, I may just turn that into a podcast that you could subscribe to, so it's a little easier to digest that. But otherwise, until further notice, it is on the Patreon. You guys are the best. I will see you the next time from Turkey. I hope everyone has a wonderful spring and beginning of summer. It's going to be pretty cool. Kind of like the calm and fun before the storm. Fall is going to be Gnarly, not in a bad way, but like a very different place for many obvious and maybe secret reasons. Okay. Love you guys. Bye bye.